They came, they saw, they agreed. We'll talk about the recent special session in Santa Fe and the capital outlay plan that is expected to pave the way for more economic progress in the state. Speaking of economic progress, many across the state have been looking to the stars for an economic boom from Spaceport America. However, a deadly accident and delays have slowed down the future of space travel in the land of enchantment. And with the recent arrests and firings in the Doña County Clerk's office, we'll talk about trust in government and how it affects the future race for County Clerk. This is New Mexico Now. Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Anthony Moreno. With us today, we have Walt Rubel from the Las Cruces Sun News, Heath Haussamen with NewMexicoPolitics.net, and Laura Villagran from the Albuquerque Journal. She is the Southern New Mexico correspondent. We're here to talk about the major issues of the day and dig a little deeper and provide some insight and analysis for you. So let's get started. Okay, everybody was talking bipartisanship at the special session recently, and I know you all are smiling because it didn't really last too long. I mean, they had to come in and get the bills passed that they had to do in just a few hours, but not too long after that, we had Victor Reyes from Progress Now New Mexico calling Republicans out about, he said, quote, they were playing hostage politics. It didn't take too long to get a response from Pat Garrett with the Republican Party of New Mexico saying that Mr. Reyes' comments were fringe and that it was Democrats who were delaying things by wanting a gasoline tax, which they said was dangerous. You know what? In this time of hyper-partisan politics, should we get used to special sessions?
Well, I hope not, because what happened in this special session was everything was agreed to behind closed doors ahead of time. They then went to Santa Fe. There was no debate. There was no discussion. You know, it was all clean and decided ahead of time. And I hope that's not where we're heading, because you know that is certainly not the kind of transparent government that I think people want and expect.
I agree with Walt completely. I think one of the problems we have up there is we have people like Senator John Arthur Smith saying, we can't do it in public. It creates, and he's actually said that publicly, a lot of them will say it privately, that there's too much tension, there's too much public pressure, the Progress Now New Mexico's, groups on the right, citizens calling in, that it just cripples them and they can't do their work. And if we can't do our work in a way that's transparent, I think we have a real problem.
Well, it's just one thing that it seems like, why wasn't this bill taken care of back when the session was in? I mean, what was really the major holdup?
I was up in Santa Fe for the last week of the session, so I got to see some of that firsthand. The gas tax that the Republicans were talking about was off the table by the last week. At least that's what Senator Smith told me on Monday. And so, yes, that was a big fight early in the session, but by the last week it wasn't. It really came down to highway funding and how to pay for it. The governor wanted to pay for it out of severance tax bonds. Senator Smith especially felt like that we were already too indebted on highway projects, and he wanted to pay for it out of capital outlay, out of the general fund. And that's where it bogged down. It was amended in the House the day before, the Friday before the end of the session. And the New Mexico legislature doesn't really have a filibuster like we do in the U.S. Congress, except for the last day of the session. It has to end at noon on that last day. The capital outlay bill got passed in the House with like 15 minutes to go. It came back over to the Senate. Cisco McSorley was already in a filibuster to kill the tax bill that also got passed in this special session, and so that's how it got defeated.
Well, it seems like this is such a important thing because we're talking about the roads and safety, and part of this session, one of the places that really benefited was what's happening in the southern part of the state in Santa Teresa. Lauren, you spent a lot of time down there. The $8.3 million for road improvements in there, how's that going to impact that area?
Well, in addition to public safety, the roads question is an economic development one as well. And I know the people in Santa Teresa, especially the business community, has been pushing and pushing for that roads money. Jerry Pacheco of the Border Industrial Association will take anyone who will listen out on Airport Road to talk about just how potholed it is. And when you're trying to sell the area as a global manufacturing zone and you have roads in the condition that they're in, it just doesn't work. So I know that the business community there is pleased.
Well, they've seen a lot of growth there, and usually it's a lot of rapid growth, and we're talking about bringing jobs to the state. Everybody on both sides of the aisle wants that. is the roads the number one thing that they needed to take care of, or is there any other things that were pressing?
I don't know if that's the number one thing. Santa Teresa had a number of issues. One of them was a lack of speculative commercial space, which is essentially buildings that are already available for companies that want to come in. And I think part of the rest of New Mexico doesn't quite realize that Santa Teresa doesn't just compete with New Mexico or other states. El Paso's right next door, and there was a glut of speculative commercial space on the market there. So they have some other issues. Santa Teresa is growing very rapidly. I think it's good to keep it in perspective though, because New Mexico is way behind other border states in terms of trade with Mexico, and that's where the growth is centered. So while we're growing quickly, it's sort of a reflection of maybe how little we grew before. I haven't been here for many years, but that's definitely part of it.
Well, where is New Mexico ranking as far as, you know, the border states go?
Oh, it's last in terms of trade with Mexico. Governor Susana Martinez does like to talk about the growth in exports that we saw last year. They doubled, if I have that just about right, from about $800 million in exports to Mexico to $1.5 billion. So that's huge. Texas has more than $100 billion in exports to Mexico. California is number 2, and then Arizona is over $8 billion. So we're growing rapidly, but there's definitely room for more growth.
Well, I know a lot of people are excited about the Union Pacific project that recently opened up down there about a year ago, a little over a year ago. Also, you know, to have things going by not only rail, hopefully roads now. What about the airport? What about air? Does anybody know anything about how the progress with that is going?
It's part of the comprehensive plan down there, and it's actually a binational plan. I've been with a legislative committee down across the border to the Foxconn facility a mile south of New Mexico. They manufacture all the Dell computers that are shipped in North America. And the airport, the county is always talking about needing upgrades to that airport, and they never have enough money for that either. And part of the plan is that the high-end computer parts that need to be built elsewhere, or at least built on American soil rather than across the border, are flown in. FedEx is intended, I think, by the people down there to be one of the main customers of the Doña County Airport, flying in and out computer parts that are then going across the border for use in Dell computers, Apple someday, whatever's there.
There's an interesting component to that, to the airport. They got CBP, Customs and Border Protection, to have customs clearance again at the airport, which they had lost for a few years. And so in addition to the serving the factories in Juarez, that airport served as an entry point for essentially wealthy people who have their own private jet, and if they fly to Mexico, they previously, in years past, cleared customs in Santa Teresa. So I had heard that the Hilton family, for example, when they would travel to the beach in Mexico, would previously stop in Santa Teresa to clear customs before heading back to Hollywood or wherever it is they live. And so when they lost that, they lost all of that private jet traffic. So I think that's another element that a lot of people don't think about that could be important for the area.
What about, you know, as far as going back and forth with companies like Foxconn, you know, installing agents? You wrote about this, I believe, in an article about a possible pilot program. The
pilot program, that's right. That's something that Foxconn has been pushing for many years now, but Mexico, the country of Mexico, just passed legislation allowing U.S. agents to carry their weapon into Mexico. And that was a major obstacle to getting that program online, because U.S. Customs and Border Protection isn't going to send one of its people into Mexico without their weapon. So if that works out, the idea would be that there would be 3, one at the Laredo airport with Mexican officials there, one in Otay Mesa on the Mexican side, and then at Foxconn. And basically U.S. Customs would be at the maquiladora, clearing their merchandise in Mexico to then take a secure road into the U.S., which, if that works out, would make our region incredibly competitive in terms of the wider border.
How about other issues in affecting that area? I was at a Public Regulation Commission meeting, it was probably 2 years ago, and a lot of the business owners down there were complaining about as far as electricity problems. and
Well,
moves.
they did pass, the legislature did pass this session a bill that allows El Paso Electric to set a special rate for commercial customers. They tried to pass this last year, but it would have made up for that by charging residential customers more. And the legislature wouldn't go for that. And so they did pass it again this year. It holds residential customers harmless, but it does allow for special rates. And I think El Paso Electric thinks that that will help them recruit and lure more companies in there.
Okay. One of the things I noticed about with this special session, though, going back, is a lot of the push was from local communities and business leaders to really get the drive back. Is that something new, or is that something that just seems that was just people were at the local level were really frustrated with?
You mean on the capital outlay bill?
Yes.
Well, I mean, they are the ones who are affected by that. It's every year before the session starts, all of the cities and counties get together and they put together their wish list. Here's what we want you to bring back from Santa Fe. And that's what and that is the capital outlay bill. And so when that got defeated, there was pressure from every city, every county, every hamlet, every town in the state to get that thing done, because everybody has their little piece of pork that they're wanting to come to their town. And that was 260 up to 290, I think, on the final bill, $1 million worth that they weren't getting. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure.
And this is not the first time that the session has ended annually without a capital outlay bill. In the last 7 or 8 years, it's happened 3 times, I think. And we were hearing from communities saying this kind of dysfunction can't continue. We need these jobs. These are construction jobs.
Yeah.
They're playgrounds and schools. They're roads.
And the capital outlay process itself is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
I mean, it is completely dysfunctional. There is no prioritization. They are constantly funding projects that will cost $1 million to do, and we'll give you 10,000. It is just insane. The state auditor, Tim Keller, put out a report before the session started, and I forget what the number was, but millions and millions of dollars of unspent capital outlay money that's just stuck in the pipeline. It's this bureaucratic nightmare. They're funding things that the cities and counties aren't asking to be funded. I mean, there is just no logical process to how this works.
Now, I'd like to move on a little bit. Unfortunately, we gotta move on to another something that a lot of people are trying to figure out, and that is the spaceport. Obviously, New Mexicans have spent over $200 million on building this facility, and it's still, we haven't seen anything happen at the facility. For those who have spent the $50+ to go on the tour, they've been able to see the facility and see the fire trucks that are there and the nice runway. However, there's been just launches and not much is really happening out there. Recently, Ned Cantwell, a blogger and columnist, wrote in the Las Cruces Sun News about Amazon founder Jeff Bezos starting his own commercial space travel company and having a successful launch.
Right.
Why isn't the state going after Bezos to try to possibly, this is what his words are, why aren't we contacting him to see if he wants to buy Spaceport America?
Well, I think one of the valid criticisms has been that we put all of our eggs in the Virgin Galactic basket. I mean, we built that spaceport for Richard Branson. I mean, he and Bill Richardson got together and said, let's build a spaceport, and that's what we did. And as people know, we had the deadly crash on Halloween Day last year where their test spaceship blew up. They have another spaceship that they're developing, but they can't tell you how long that's going to take. And I think one of the real frustrating things has been Richard Branson giving these promises. Oh, we're going to be flying in 6 months. Oh, we're going to be flying by the end of the year. And they were always wildly optimistic. They were always incredibly wrong. And I think people are frustrated now because we were supposed to be having rich people from all over the world coming to southern New Mexico, spending all of this money and flying up into space. And I think people are still hopeful that someday that will happen, but boy, it sure looks farther away now than it did before last October.
But it seems like the the Spaceport Authority is banking on not so much the people flying into space, but a lot of people coming to Truth or Consequences to watch them do that.
Well, they just put out their next 5-year business plan that some people said was kind of behind the curve. But they have talked about a broader business plan. Yes, the Virgin Galactic Terminal is a one-trick pony. That's not like an airport where other aerospace companies can move in. It's only for Virgin. So the Spaceport has come up with this business plan that includes drone flights, satellite communications, tourism is one of the things. I have the question, which is, do people want to come to see a spaceport that isn't really functioning in the sense of, where they can't see a spaceship take off into space? They have that beautiful, long, 12,000-foot runway, and all of the launches that have happened have been vertical launches. So that runway hasn't actually been used for any kind of spaceship launch. I don't know.
Yeah, and one of the problems we get in now, and you're exactly right, Walt. We put everything in one company. The Spaceport now says, and has said to the legislature, we need several $1 million to build another hangar so we can attract another big company. Maybe they do want to talk to Amazon.com, whoever, and the legislature just laughs at it. We're not building it again.
As a matter of fact, the governor included $4 million in her proposal, and John Arthur Smith told me that was the one thing that everybody universally opposed. They can't understand, as you said, they have a hangar there, but it's for Virgin Galactic. And so the legislators are saying, well, we have a hangar, we're not using it. Why would we build another one? I mean, they can't wrap their heads around the fact. And from their perspective, I do understand that we poured $220 million into this thing, and all of the promises we've been told haven't been upheld yet.
I will interject that in my reporting on this, I find that there's a spectrum, and depending on where a person is on the pessimism versus optimism spectrum, you get very, very different perspectives on the spaceport. There are a lot of pessimists out there who talk about the hangar being only for Virgin Galactic, but then there are others who say, trying to get to space, commercial companies trying to get to space is going to take a long time, but once it happens, things will move very quickly. So the people who are optimistic about that do see the spaceport as very forward-thinking, as a place that could really revolutionize the New Mexico economy. But it really just depends on your perspective.
Is that why we're seeing some, as far as the plan goes, they're trying to diversify so many things? We've seen, obviously, a lot of car commercials.
They're scrambling.
Yeah.
I mean, after the Virgin Galactic crash, all of their plans got thrown in the wastebasket that day, and they've had to come up with a plan B. And the idea of people going there for a convention center, we don't even have a road to the thing yet. How are you going to get tourists if you don't have a road? And not only that, how are you going to get tourists? The only reason people would go there would be to see a launch. I mean, what else is there to see? Buildings? And as it's been explained to me, you can't have people launching because of the FAA license. You have to have a minimal amount of people there when the rocket goes up. If you have a whole group of people standing there watching the launch, then that would violate the FAA license. And so I have sympathy for them. I understand why they're scrambling, but it seems to me they're throwing a lot of stuff against the wall and hoping something sticks.
Well, and this is a very long-term project that was not sold that way. Yeah. We had a governor who was running for president and wanted everyone to think he was going to change the state dramatically quickly and propel into a presidential campaign from that. But the reality is it was always going to be hard. It was always going to take a long time. We changed administrations. Martinez administration came in, and that governor was very skeptical of this project initially, thought it was part of Bill Richardson corruption. Eventually reversed courses completely and now seems to be behind the spaceport, but that was a delay. Funding issues, the economy dropping was a delay, and then Virgin Galactic's problems have delayed this thing repeatedly. And so there are two different philosophies in America right now for doing this. One is entirely privately funded, which the Amazon.com founder is doing. The other is a partnership between government and a private company. And Virgin Galactic has spent more money trying to build their spaceship than we have on a spaceport. It's not like we're putting all the money into it. We've put an immense amount of money into it. But this is like this public-private partnership that government doesn't tend to think long-term because voters don't think long-term. And so it's hard.
Well, speaking of long-term, I mean, it seems like by the time Virgin Galactic could possibly have a spaceship running and up in the air, will they be behind the other companies, like you said, and
Yeah.
is space travel going to change?
Well, I had the opportunity to interview their customers. There was a customer day a couple of years ago out in Mojave, and it was really eye-opening because I spoke with people from a lot of different backgrounds. There was the wealthy technology magnate from Europe who called up 6 of his friends and bought a ticket for the whole, filled the whole spaceship in a matter of 30 minutes. Again, these tickets cost $250,000 a pop. And then there was the astrophysicist who had worked on the Hubble telescope, and he was an older man with a cane, and he just got dreamy-eyed thinking about it. So, their customers, I think, are probably more patient than New Mexico voters. They're very excited, and they know it might take much longer than Mr. Branson had originally planned.
And I'm not aware of anybody else who's doing what Virgin is trying to do, passenger flights. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on in terms of commercial space implications. But I think Virgin's the only one working on, shooting passengers up into space just for, an expensive joyride.
Right. But New Mexico has actively jumped into a competition to attract a commercial space industry. It's going to gather around one city or a handful of places across the country and bring the jobs that are really the way that we sold this to New Mexico taxpayers. And you bring up a really good point, which is Virgin Galactic's delays put us behind in that race, which was the reason we got into this to begin with.
All right, well, we're going to move on real quick. There's another topic I want to talk about, and recently folks in Doña County are very aware of, and that is the recent arrests at the Doña County Clerk's office with tied to an alleged check cashing scheme. Now, obviously, I'm kind of curious, how has this shook up trust in government in general, especially here in Doña County?
Well, I think the fact that they were accessing the voter rolls, allegedly, as a part of this scheme sort of takes it to a different level. I mean, in order to vote, which is the fundamental of a democracy, we are required to turn over this information that, if it falls into the wrong hands, could do us damage. And we trust the people who we're giving that to will safeguard it. And so that hasn't happened. But in terms of eroding confidence or trust in government, I just, and Heath, I'm sure you do too, remember the days before Lynn Ellens, when we were having absentee ballots show up in the drain pipe of the bathroom in the courthouse months later, when we called the election wrong in the race between Bush and Gore. Because Doña County got the votes wrong. They saw a 6 and thought it was a 1. Thankfully for the hanging chads in Florida, we weren't the embarrassment of the country over that. But I just think that has been so shaken that it's hard to shake it anymore.
And I do think that what I found in reporting on the story is that people in general from across the political spectrum give Lynn Ellens credit for cleaning up that office and the other people who work in there. I spoke with Russell Allen, the head of the local Chamber of Commerce, active Republican. He used to be the Republican Party chairman in Doña County. He was there on election night in 2012 or 14 when they were recounting a state Senate race. And so I trust them that they're doing it right. I have some ideological disagreements with them, and we're going to try to beat them in the election next year. But this happens. We have these kind of data breaches in ATM machines, gas pumps, Target, whatever. It's more concerning, I think, to me on a personal level and to people I heard from when it's your voter information than when it's your debit card, because a bank is watching that and issues you a new debit card right away. And our voter information's just been out there, and I think it was just one employee in the office who's accused of accessing that and stealing it. But how do we stop that? I don't know.
That's a really interesting question, because I spoke with Clerk Ellens, and he wanted to propose, or he is going to propose, that New Mexico stop collecting Social Security full Social Security numbers as part of the voter database. New Mexico is one of only 4 states that still collects the full Social Security number, so that's an interesting proposal. But like Heath said, how do you stop it? Ultimately, this wasn't a high-tech breach. No, this was allegedly one woman writing information down on loose leaf notebook paper and stashing it away in her home. So, there's certainly the question of how much personal information do we need on voters? Could the last 4 digits suffice? Certainly other states do other things. But again, in this case, it almost boils down to ethics as a personal ethics as opposed to security.
Yeah.
But this comes on top of the situation in the treasurer's office where he has admitted to sexual harassment of employees. It comes on top of the county commission voting to raise taxes after 2 elections telling them not to. I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons why people are unhappy with county government right now.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, we're talking politics as well, political fallout of this. The whistleblower in the case, Robert R.J. Hernandez, who was recently fired, he was a temporary employee, says that he was fired because he blew the whistle on that operation happening there. And then you had Clerk Ellens saying that that was not the case, it was for something else. And then after that, we have Deputy Clerk Scott Kraling, suspending his campaign. Walt, you wrote a little bit about that.
Yeah.
It's a little, are we already talking about campaigns?
Christmas music in April is what I refer to. The county clerk running for an election in November 2016, suspending his campaign in June 2015.
Well, yeah, it seems like there's always politics, though. We don't want to get back to this hyper-partisan area. And but yeah, I want to thank you for bringing that up, and I want to thank you all for your time. And unfortunately, it goes pretty quick when you have a good conversation like this. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony.
We want to thank you for joining us on this first episode of New Mexico Now. We hope to continue a deeper discussion on this program of major stories affecting our state. Let us know what you think by emailing us at feedback@nmsu.edu. You can also keep the conversation going on Twitter at KRWG and by liking us on Facebook. We want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.